If you're after a comfortable, relaxing driving experience, you might plump for a Jaguar, maybe a Rolls-Royce. But for a truly laid-back drive, some would argue that you're better off going to the French.
And nowhere do you see better examples of our Gallic cousins' ability to make cars that make driving look like something getting in the way of having a nod off than hydraulic Citroëns. The trouble is, when you look at some of the great hydraulic Citroëns, the DS, the CX, the XM, all fabulous cars in their own right, they're also quite unapproachable. And when you get inside and find that it looks like a spaceship with all the different angles and weird buttons and crazy dash layouts, suddenly that sensible BMW looks rather tempting. The BX was the closest Citroën had got to producing a car with its hydro-pneumatic suspension that was still vaguely mainstream, but it still wasn't a truly approachable conventional car. You had the crazy dash layout, even though it was revised for the later models, and styling that wouldn't look out of place on the set of Star Trek. So for the early 1990s, Citroën finally decided to do something about it. Get the hydro-pneumatic technology, but put it into a package that normal people might actually want to own. And in 1992, we got exactly that with the Xantia. Right from the outset, the Xantia is a more approachable, more normal car than the BX that it replaced. The styling, whilst it is handsome styling by Bertone, is much more conservative, is much more normal. Climb inside and that normality continues. For a start, the single-prong steering wheel is nowhere to be seen, even in the earlier cars. The clocks are right in front of you, they're normal, plain and easy to read, and all the buttons are where you'd expect, not on the roof or behind the sun visor or in the back seat like they would have been in a CX. In 1995, we even got the uber-practical brake estate version to round off the model lineup and create a hydro-Citroen that at last was mainstream. That made it a big hit with company car buyers, with families, and with people who'd always liked the idea of a hydro-Citroen but couldn't bring themselves to own something quite as left field as a CX or an XM. A hydro-Citroen was now a viable, genuine alternative to the likes of Ford and Vauxhall. In fact, the Xantia was so popular over its 9-year run, it managed to sell 1.2 million of the things overall. That makes it the second best-selling hydraulic Citroën in history, second only in fact to the legendary DS. So if you're tempted by this comfortable and relaxing and yet normal hydro-Citroen lark, what do you need to know about owning one? Well, to find out, let's have a chat with Jack, who's not only the contributor to a few of our magazines and one half of the presenting team of our all-new On Your Marks podcast, he also owns this rather lovely Xantia.
I've had this now 3.5 years. Yes, 3.5 years, and that was because it got to the stage where I had 4 classic cars dating from between the 1960s and the 1980s, and none of them worked. So I decided I needed a sensible modern car, and I thought, BXs and Xantias are kind of like sensible but also exciting and Citroën-y. So I started looking at those, and BXs were, by that stage, way out of my price range for anything that wasn't a complete rust bucket. So I looked at Xantias, this one turned up, and I bought it for 440 quid. It has been essentially faultless. It's certainly never let me down. It's just needed a little bit of welding on the inner wing for its last MOT, just a little patch. The brake valve leaked, which on these, because the brakes work off the suspension system, or the hydraulic system, the footwell slowly filling with AHM. The carpets turned green. That needed to go to a specialist to be sorted out. Basic service items and the suspension spheres and stuff like that, no problem and perfectly cheap. The washer fluid bottle split. It was really hard to get the right one because what I'm learning with this is that Citroën in the 90s seemed to make about 6 subtly different versions of every single part. If it was a hatchback, it would have a different washer bottle. If it had a different engine, it would have a different washer bottle. Trying to source a new air conditioning compressor for it, which again is quite tricky, not because the compressors aren't available, but it's making sure that you get exactly the right one. Incredibly practical. I've towed with this, I've towed cars, towed boats with it, I've put the kayak on the roof. It's got the hydro-pneumatic Citroën weirdness and the character to it. I think it's a really good blend of modern practicality and classic character, if that sounds really cheesy, but it's true.
I can't overemphasise how relaxing it is to drive a hydraulic Citroën, and the Xantia really is no different. You sit back in these big, comfy seats, you hold the steering wheel with 2 fingers on either side, and you just waft along and let the car take the strain. The thing is that underneath that hydro waftiness, the Xantia's got a bit of a secret. It actually handles really rather well. This was praised by road testers back in the day for being remarkably good in the corners, to the extent that you don't mind chucking it around a little bit. The steering's sharp and responsive, it's really nicely composed, and because of that hydro-pneumatic suspension, it's not upset by mid-corner bumps. And if you are the sort to hoon your comfortable cars now and then, Citroën had just the model for you. Yep, the Xantia wasn't all sensible, because in 1994 we got the Xantia Activa. In many respects, a normal Xantia, but under the skin, it was radically different.
The Activa incorporated sensors that detected lean when cornering. Thick stabilising bars connecting the diagonal corners of the car were controlled by hydraulic rams and then commanded by the computers, which counteracted body roll. The result was a car that cornered with almost zero lean to extraordinary effect. In the famous Swedish Elk swerve test, the Activa holds the 53 mph speed record for it even today. For context, second place at 51 mph is held by the Porsche 911 GT3 RS.
But maybe the Activa misses the point, because the whole ethos behind the Xantia was to give you that wonderful wafty hydro-Citroen experience, but in a conventional package, something that was approachable to normal people. And in that respect, when you bear in mind the fact it was in production for nearly a decade and sold over 1 million units in that time, it was a total success. Here's proof that when Citroën are a little bit sensible, it's rather brilliant.